Parnassus, and it's about 2,000 meters high, and on the bottom of it there is the Temple of Apollo. I visited that, either with care or without, I don't know anymore. But and in the basement of that Apollo temple there is the Pytho, the priestess, who had the oracles for centuries. And Socrates went there. And she's the one who told him that he was the wisest of all Greeks. And then for the rest of his life he wanted to prove that, or disapprove. It came out that, all the others knew, he was the only one who knew that he did not know anything. That was the peak of wisdom then.
That he didn't know anything?
But they were, generous. Everybody went to the Pytho in the basement, and she would then, tell them what the God had in store for them. But up there on Parnassus, that's where these guys are meeting. Adorno, those are all who makes it, and Schoenberg, the musician, and also their wives. And so they're all dead now, but they live on Parnassus, and so then they talk about their adultery, all the 4 wives. And of course, not only he committed adultery, she committed adultery too, and so it goes back and forth. But sometimes there was. There was a second angel. That is this one angel there, the Angelus Novus, the angel of history. Do you know who that is? Hitler.
Really?
Hitler. This is at least one hypothesis. This fellow, the painter there, painted that in Berlin, and not in Berlin, in Munich. And Hitler was at that time in Munich in the 20s, and he was deciding, between painter to be a painter. And he painted a lot too, and lived from it, and become a politician. And at that time, Klee painted angels. About 53 angels he painted. This is only one of them. But there is another angel which is called Manifestation of the Miracle. And Dora gave that picture to her husband, to his 28th birthday or something like that. And so Dora comes up to Parnassus and asks why he never mentioned that picture which she gave to him, why he always mentioned this one there. And he inherited that to Shalem, and it's hanging in Jerusalem now in the museum there. And he really went into the lives of these people, so it's all authentic really, but of course, after their death they are on the Parnassus, so he made this up. And it's well done, But it's a Jew, his name is Gerassi, Karl, and he struggles for his identity, Jewish identity in the thing, in America.
Have you had a chance to listen to the CD?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But I wanted to read it first and then we can maybe listen to it here, too. But, it goes very much into detail, all kinds of little things, which he picked up. He must have studied this for years and years. And but the main thing is, who is a Jew, the assimilated Jew after the French Revolution doesn't know who he is anymore. It's a race, it's a nation. Some of them are not religious. He's wrong about Adorno. He thinks Adorno has nothing of religion. That's not true. He didn't. So therefore, I'm glad I did this project now, because that shows religion. That shows, that they're all Jews in a religious sense. No matter if it's nationhood or race, but they are religious Jews, and who have negated Judaism, but at the same time have preserved a lot. It's the same thing like Freud, who said someday people will read my writings and they will find out how Jewish I am. Mm-hmm. But it is hidden, They hide it themselves in a certain sense, their Jewishness. The Adorno is really Wiesengrund, that's the Jewish name of his father, but he stopped it when he became citizen here. He put Adorno and left the Wiesengrund out.
Is Adorno Italian?
It's Italian, yeah, it's from Corsica. His mother was a Catholic from Corsica. He was baptized Catholic. Mm-hmm. He was baptized Catholic, educated Protestant, and then became a Marxist.
That's a good movement.
Good mixture.
Hello. Everybody find their way? Good morning. How are you doing? All right. You're in the right place. Just
Okay. Here is Croatia. No, Serbia.
How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Why is our girl tonight?
Lisa is coming. Liz is coming.
Okay.
They let her out early of class a little
Out of
bit.
prison or what?
What was the name of the class? Then we'll determine whether it was a prison or not.
No, it was Don Kramer's class.
Oh, wait, that's okay.
No prison. No prison.
No.
Prison.
Yeah, he's a nice fellow. Yeah. He has that little show there on television. Have you seen it?
Seen you on it.
Yeah, I was on it too somewhere, but he does it more regularly. He reads a lot of books about corporate crime, you know. Then he brings it on television. So Lisa will find a way to...
Liz. Yeah.
Liz.
Yeah.
Okay.
She knows.
Now, there's a chair there, and there's a chair.
Yeah.
You can take any of those chairs that you are comfortable, and there are some
inside
cookies
shoes
that you can take. Okay. Oh, inside shoes. Oh.
Outside
My
shoes.
God. Oh.
A lot of stuff to carry
So
around.
if you thought Behemoth was a fictional book that they never wrote, how did you put it in here in your recommended works?
Yeah, well, I never had the text. I never had the text in my possession. I think. Oh, maybe I had one.
No, now you do.
Yeah. Well, I don't have all the books which I quote. I may not even have read all the books I quote, huh?
But your students do.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's wonderful.
You know
Because this is still the best book about fascism, you know. Neumann wrote. He was a Jurist, and he was very good.
They changed, you know, the Jürgen Kogan's book. If they don't call it the SS State now.
What is it
They
called?
call it The Theory and Praxis of Hell or something like that.
Really? That's poetical.
When did they change the name?
The edition that I bought of it had a different name, and it says, you know, that they went through a name change or whatever.
He may also have written something else, you know.
Yeah.
He's very productive. I mean, he has written a lot.
Is he still around?
Oh, no, he died.
Oh, yeah.
Who is this?
Very unhappy.
Kogan's what we're talking about, but Neumann wrote it.
But in 2001, the SS State came out once more, and, you know, the name is SS State.
The SS Staat?
I have all the copies up there.
Heard of that one?
Have you heard about it? Yeah.
Only under that name, the SS.
Do you know how that came about, that book? He was in Buchenwald for 7 years. He was not a Jew, but he was a conservative Catholic from Austria, and his deal was to preserve the heritage of Austrian nobility, and so he traveled in Germany and made some anti-Nazi statements, and they caught him and put him into Buchenwald for 7 years. And since he was, had an academic background, they put him in the office, and that's how he survived. So he was one of the bureaucrats there. And then Buchenwald was the only concentration camp which had an insurrection, because they were communists. Also the son of Stalin was in Buchenwald. And so the communists somehow got weapons into the camp. And one night they stormed the SS barracks and butchered them all, hunted them through the forests, you know, and killed every one of them.
In Sobibor, they also had a revolt in that camp.
Well, that's the only one I heard of, and a successful one too. And so at the same time the Americans came and caught them all, caught all these communists, and put them into the camp back, and put new machine guns on the towers and so on. So the communists said, we told you, first we had the German fascism, and then we had damn it American fascism. But they somehow, I mean, there was a rationale behind what the Americans did, because there was the danger that they would go down to Weimar, and Weimar is close by. And that's where Goethe wrote the Faust. Not my Kampf, the Faust. It's Faust. So, so it was possible that they would have gone down and would have killed the whole population. Because the concentration camp people were marched from the railroad station of Weimar, you know, through the whole town into the mountain where that camp was. So everybody in Weimar knew, you know, what has happened. And Helmut Fritzsche, who knows Helmut Fritzsche, my colleague there? He was here at Protestant dogmatic professor in East Germany, and I went with him there. Then I visited Buchenwald, and he was ordered by the Americans to clean up that camp. No, when the Americans took over a camp, they took the civilian population and let them clean up the whole thing, the dead people, to bury the dead people. And so he saw the camp right after the Americans took over. And this, hangs together with another problem which I discuss all the time, and that is this theodicy problem. Because when I came home from the war, with all the battles, I told my teacher in the Lessing Gymnasium that I had problems, with this justice of God and the misery of his world, for which he is responsible. And so he said, well, you have to read Goethe's Faust. And Goethe's Faust is a doubling up of Heilig's. You found the way.
I did.
That shows super intelligence.
I was kind of concerned about breaking into your house. I didn't know which door to go in.
It's okay.
I just broke in.
It has many entrances. So, and so I told my German teacher there, and we were all coming back from the front, and we had years of battle behind us. And so then he said, I should read Goethe's Faust. Because Goethe's Faust is an imitation of the book Job. And the book Job is not Jewish. Job was from outside of Israel. So they took it in, and the priest changed the text. So they forged it. But nevertheless, this was now the solution of the theology problem. Namely, Faust, is a good man, then the devil comes and goes to God and says, well, he's good now because it's a good life. But what if it gets bad? Now let me make it bad for him, and then we'll see, if he's still faithful. So it is a test theodicy. So I read the Faust, and I went back to the teacher and said, it's damn it boring. And he said, how can it be boring? It's our greatest poet, Goethe, and this is the greatest book he ever wrote in Weimar. And so I said, well, maybe, but it is boring, Then he said, well, you're still too young. I said, well, I fought, through all these battles now, and I should be old enough. I said, wait 20 years. So I did wait 20 years, and then I read it again. But he was dead in the meantime. So nevertheless, I read it, and it was as boring as it was before. So then I went to Buchenwald. This was only a few years ago. And before I went to the Goethe house, I went to Buchenwald, and I saw the whole thing there. It was horrifying. There were prisons where a priest from Austria was crucified upside down. They let him hang, and he had already heart condition, so he died. And because he was a village priest, and he was supposed to marry a guy with a much younger woman. And he was against the Nazi arrangement that one had to have a civil marriage before one would have a religious marriage. The Austrians still had a religious marriage, that was enough, like here. But the Nazis then introduced this civil marriage first, and then he could go to the priest. And he rebelled against this, that was number one. But also the girl was a farm girl, and she did not have her senses well together, and he thought to marry this old man, that was not healthy for her. And so he opposed it, and so the SA sent him to Buchenwald. But the camps were under the SS, and the SA, that were the proletarians. The SS were the bourgeois creeps. So after a few years, the village SA said, we want to have the priest back, because he has suffered enough now. In the meantime, that man whom we didn't want to marry had become a criminal. He was sitting in prison. So they thought the priest was right after all. So let him come back. The SS said, well, you can get him back. So then they tortured him, crucified him upside down, and sent the dead body back. And the same thing they did to the Protestant minister, So we went from one of these prisons to the other. There were special prisons outside, around the camp. Then we went into the camp, all the barracks, whatever was left of it. They had a brothel there with Polish girls, like they bring the girls in now from the Ukraine and so on all over Europe. So they had them in the camps. But not only for the SS, prostitutes for the SS, but also for the prisoners. So when the prisoners were good and worked hard and so on, they could have a prostitute too. That was the reward in Buchenwald, yeah. But I think it was in other camps as well, but that's, so this whole hellish thing. And then I went from there to the Goethe house, and then I knew, why the Goethe was boring. I mean, things are boring when they're meaningless, And somehow, through the events, that test theodicy had become meaningless, It is one of the fundamental things of Islam and Judaism and Christianity, they all have that still. But, after Auschwitz and these things, it does not make any sense whatsoever. I mean, what kind of a God would test people like this?
Meaningful suffering.
Yeah, right. I mean, that there is any meaning to that suffering, So, I mean, what kind of a God would that be? It would be a monstrosity. So you could not possibly worship him, and so on. So, and all three Abrahamic religions have trouble with this. So, but now I have the solution to the problem, why that thing was growing. Unfortunately, I could not tell this to a teacher anymore. So that was just a sideshow. Any other question before we start? All right, so it goes.
We want to ask him more.
I've got some questions.
Yeah, okay.
Good, let's
Start out with the questions.
I'll probably take it back to the basics.
Don't forget the cookies there. Don't forget the cookies. Oh, are you all comfortable? There is still one chair over there. If somebody wants to take the chair, then
enormous cookie.
you have more room there.
You do.
Are you comfortable?
I'll just take a big chair so I can look important.
Well, there's another one there. Okay, yes.
Okay, like I said...
By the way, let's push that button and then we have light from above. Unfortunately, the electrician who did this got divorced and then had a car accident and died recently.
Oh.
That's all what's left of him. This beautiful light.
His work is what's left.
Yeah, his work is what left. He was a nice fellow. Okay, now your questions.
Okay. So it's kind of a very basic question, but as I was going through the syllabus, we talk a lot about recognition, the struggle for recognition.
Right.
Could you explain to me why that's so significant?
Right, that's a very, very good question. How should I start? There are 5 human potentials. They were discovered when Hegel was in Jena, and the Frankfurt School took that over. Not only the Frankfurt School, before that Marx and so on. Their potentials are language and memory, work and tool, sexuality and eroticism, the struggle for recognition, and community or nationhood. So 5 human potentials. That is in Hegel's phenomenology. So they are phenomenological insights or anthropological. So you could say the Frankfurt School has a certain anthropology. And this anthropology has 5 human potentials. And these 5 human potentials are evolutionary universals. That means as long as man is man, or has been man, or will be man, he will have these 5 potentials. And if you ask the question, how does somebody speak? What does he remember? What work does he do? How is he sexually? What is his power position? To what community does he belong? You know about everything about him. It would almost be exhaustive what you know about him. So, Hegel is the last real religious thinker, and that means that transcendence was for him a principle of unity. That means the religious person somehow found his identity in religion and then realized his identity to speaking, remembering, working, and so on and so on. So these 5 potentials were held together by this religious transcendence. As this religious transcendence disappeared, or as Nietzsche says, civil society killed God, that unifying principle was missing. And so the thinkers after Hegel tried to find a new principle of unity, and some of them concentrated on sex and eroticism, like Freud. Some of them concentrated on recognition and power, like Nietzsche. Some of them concentrated on nationalism, like Hitler and Mussolini and Reagan and so on. Or some concentrated on language, and some concentrated on work, like Marx or Schmidt as well. And Ricardo and Sayers, the economists. They thought it is work and tool by which you decode man's being and man's history and so on. Or it is language, like Habermas today and Hameth and so on. So it is either language for them or it's a struggle for recognition, and that is how we decode the human history. And so the shift, in the Frankfurt School, why it's so significant, is the shift from work and tool, the whole means of production, the productive relations, and so on, all that is concentrated on, is an elaboration on the potential of work and tool. And in the 60s and 70s, there was then a shift. They were Marxists, but somehow Habermas introduced the linguistic turn, which we have everywhere, from Wittgenstein and so on, introduced that into the Frankfurt School. That was a shift then from work and tool to language and memory. And that is the tremendous success of Habermas, who has fertilized, all kinds of sciences through introducing that shift. And also politically, it's not the class struggle which ultimately will decide, but what decides is to enter the public sphere, to have a public discourse among people in a democratic way, not to dictate, a future number 3, the free society on the basis of necessity, and so on, as Marx said. And so it doesn't get automatic, because Marx has still a theological element in him, namely history with necessity moves from slavery to feudalism to bourgeoisie to communism and so on and so on. While there is a shift now, it depends on people if we will go that way. And it depends on people talking with each other, entering discourse with each other in the public sphere, and make the arrangements by which, the institutional arrangements, by which they can possibly enter alternative future number 3.
Why do you think that shift happened?
Well, because Marxism had run into difficulties, because you have to see that Marx thought it would come soon, that communist revolution. In 1848 he went to Frankfurt, and he hoped that the bourgeoisie would connect itself with the proletariat and would overthrow the nobility, and the bourgeoisie allied itself with the feudal lords and fought against the proletariat in Frankfurt and so on. And so there was a disappointment there. And then the great disappointment of Horkheim and Adorno that the European workers, German workers, did fall for fascism. Instead of making the revolution, they joined Hitler. And that is the Fromm thing. That's Walter's specialty. Fromm's work about the 8,000 workers, where they made research, sociological research, statistics and everything, and found out that the 8,000 workers, that there may be 12% or so who were on the right, the authoritarian personality, and the 12% or so on the left, the revolutionary personality, which then Fromm called the democratic personality when he came over here. And so that is the continuum, and they tried to measure on this continuum how strong this authoritarian, this fascist personality would be, in order to make a prediction then how great the chance of an authoritarian government like Hitler would be. Because you need masses and masses of authoritarian personalities in order to make an authoritarian personality, a populism on the right, really effective. And their predictions, were quite correct. So you had workers on the left who were revolutionary guys, social democrats, and communists, and Hitler put them all into concentration camps, dissolved the parties and so on. And you had workers on the right, not all workers, but a relatively small group who would join the fascist army, would become SA men, and very much devoted to Hitler. And then you had all kinds of people in between. So people who would not be real communists, but they would make jokes about Hitler and so on. That was dangerous already. Or you had on the other side people who were not maybe as men, but were quiet majority, which were with Hitler anyway, in spite of the fact that they had no uniform. So when Hitler was able 7 million people, to give work, 7 million people in 1934, he was a messiah, But now Obama wants to give 2 million people work, or wants to preserve 4 or 5 million jobs and so on. And we are 360 million people. There were only 50 million Germans, and he gives 6 million Germans work. Of course they jubilated and so on. And ultimately, there was no resistance from the communists, or very small resistance from the workers against Hitler. The 1944 June 20th attack against Hitler, the assassination attempt, was carried by the nobility, that means von Stauffenberg, and it was carried by the bourgeoisie. So the mayor who was to take over, and the chancellor and so on, they were all bourgeois. And there was no worker rebellion. There was a huge worker rebellion in 1917, 1918. They made the revolution in Munich and in Hamburg and in Leningrad.
Spartacus. Spartacus movement.
Yeah, the Spartacus movement, with Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg and so on. So, but there was nothing in comparison. So, and one cannot say that Hitler simply wiped out the opposition. They were with him. And it was the word socialism in it, National Socialism. And it would be an interesting PhD to write, how much socialism was in his nationalistic movement. I mean, he pulled the party to the right. The brothers, what were their names? Strauss or whatever. They were two brothers who were really on the left of the party, and they wanted to nationalize, they wanted to put the capitalists on trial, go to Thyssenfort and all this. But Hitler stopped that already in 1934, where he said history will decide about us, not how many capitalists we put into prison, but how many workers we gave work. And that was based on the agreement which Hitler had with Henry Ford. They were good friends, both of them. Ford gave him 20,000 marks for a Mercedes when he came out of prison, and he had his pockets full of MIT and so on. All these people, a lot of corporations and so on who had dealings with him, and IG Farben and all these people. So. But the theory, the economic theory which they had in common was something Hitler had no idea about economics until he took some courses in Munich, the professor. And this professor was a specialist for credit slavery, credit card slavery. And so that's where he first had the first insight in economics and Hitler fought against credit slavery. But the main theoretical issue was that one had to uncouple productive capital from speculative capital. That means Wall Street or the Byrd in Frankfurt or wherever it is. And so Hitler did this. He uncoupled it and therefore was able to overcome the depression and so on. Stalin did the same thing and never got into a depression. So, and people are discussing that now again, The question, should we not go back, to productive capital again? They don't mention Ford. It was good to mention him because he had that insight, If Ford would be alive now, we would have 3 months ago, we would have pushed those billions not into Wall Street, but into productive capital. That means into car production, airplane production, and so on and so on, So obviously people still remember this somehow, but not clearly enough. And it has no operative effect at this moment. It's not operative at this moment. It would mean, that the money would not have gone to Wall Street, and they would have let Wall Street sack into nirvana and so on. And would have shifted, but it would be a revolutionary type of a shift. Okay, but you asked for the significance, right? And the significance is that the disappointments with Marxism, already in 1848, which Marx himself still experienced. Then, in 1917, the revolutions came about. In Munich, there was a double revolution. There were 2 communistic revolutions, and Horkheimer even got involved in it. He was under suspicion that he was one of the communist leaders. One leader was assassinated, and then it was all, by the government, was beaten down in Hamburg as well. Same thing happened with 1895, with the Tsar and the Black Sea upheaval on the fleet, which was also beaten down by the Romanovs with unbelievable cruelty. So it didn't come through, and the nationalistic movements, the fascist movements finally won by 1933. Mussolini first, and then Franco and Salazar and Hitler and so on. So the right won over the left. And for the Frankfurt School, I think the betrayal of the workers. They expected that the workers would make a revolution and would overthrow Hitler and the Herren Club, which is the group of capitalists. They like Krupp and Thyssen. When you go to the elevators there, you see Krupp everywhere. I saw a car running out, it said Thyssen or whatever. So they're obviously very much in business again. And so, they didn't. The workers didn't. And it was an unbelievable fraud That means Hitler, through his rhetoric, and he was a genius in terms of the German language, was able to convince the workers that international socialism was the wrong thing, that one had to have a national socialism in terms of harmony between the capitalistic class and so on. He thought that Ford, for instance, was the great man in economics, like he was the great man in politics, and so. So it was the great man theory of history in a certain sense, and so.
Underline man.
It was an accident. They wanted to Strasse, where the two names Strasse, National Strasse. So the Herren Club, the club of the German industrialists in Düsseldorf, sent an emissary to Berlin and wanted to speak with Strasser as a member of the party, a left-wing member of the National Socialistic Party. And they couldn't find Strasser, but they found Hitler on the street. And Hitler said, I have a much better man to answer this question. So he went instead of Strasser. Later on, he killed one of the Strasser brothers, was killed in Munich in the railway station, and the other one fled to Canada, and he lived there he's dead now, but he lived there for many years. So this Workers' Party was the role which Hitler played into it is that he pulled it to the right, and that was tremendously effective. He somehow had something to say for all the classes, and the workers fell for it. And that he pretended to make a revolution, and that he made a counter-revolution was the fundamental fraud. That was his fundamental crime, which the bourgeoisie, of course, cannot see really. The bourgeoisie wanted to make use of him, like we do. We have a little dictator here and there, he does our job, and if he doesn't obey, like Saddam Hussein, he will be executed, or will be put in prison, like the guy in the Canal Zone down there is in Miami. Right. So the people in Guatemala and so, or in Nicaragua, that's how they wanted to handle Hitler. They thought, Hitler will be the guy who puts the communists in concentration camps and so on, and he got out of control. That he was smarter, more genius than all of them together. That is what happened. So he broke through, the whole. They thought his government would last maybe a year or two, and then he would be finished, and then he would have done their job, and that was it. When Thyssen saw that it goes further, Thyssen left the party and fled the country, and so. But the others went with Hitler, and so he pressed the nationalistic element and got the army together and all these people. But he did have some socialistic things too, So he came from below. He was Joe the Plumber, He came from the low middle class, a medieval type of a thing. And he had his base particularly in the low middle class. But he had enough people in the upper classes to support him, and then the masses were cheated in terms of this. And it looked, he thought, I'm a little man, I come from below, I'm your man, and so. The gesture of Obama yesterday, dancing with the woman, the army woman, and one of the balls there, and she dancing with the GI there, is this idea of equality, we are all the same, and so on and so on. This egalitarian element was there, and that fascinated people, that a little guy like Hitler could really make it there and could, and was a genius in internal politics and international politics. He was a great phenomenologist, they called him, and his greatness was that he had the moment, the right moment. He could connect the images with the right moment to act, and take the risks and so on. And that was all tremendously admired, and there was something to all of this, of course.
Well, keeping with Lisa's question here over the 5 human potentials,
right,
differentiate for us, between how the Hegelian left, right, and center use them. Is it that they emphasize one at the expense of others, or do they ignore them outright? How does the Hegelian left, center, and right
Well, I don't think that it is, there are people who introduce that linguistic turn, on the right, in the center, and on the left. So it goes through all of them. there are people, in the Marxist thing who do not go along with this language thing.
No, they don't.
The attack, from the left against Habermas has something to do with that, that he forgets about the class
language, but he has ignored the memory aspect of it.
I mean, he forgot, therefore, the whole revolutionary impulse. He came to the States and he studied linguistics here in the States. He got it from here, from Peirce, for instance. Who was one of the people who prepared all these Kantians here. And so he got so fascinating by this, and in terms of language and sentences and grammar and so on and so on, that he forgot completely, the other thing about.
Because that's what Axel Honneth is doing here with this grammar of recognition, this grammar of struggle.
Right.
And that's where I'm having difficulty. If we're having this linguistic turn,
right.
Where's the memory element of it? Why aren't we having any discussion of Holblock or any of his work on social memory?
Right. So when Habermas introduced that, and then about language and memory, and then, of course, there was critique from these political theologians and so on, that he did not emphasize enough the memory thing. And then, of course, his own left students, was against him about this too much, about language and grammar and all this. But he added already something which Honneth did later on and developed it further. And that was the other human potential, namely the struggle for recognition. Because you cannot really have a discourse with other people when the other is lower than you or higher than you. So between the capitalists and the labor unions, there can be, debate or whatever, but there cannot really be a discourse. So therefore, from the very beginning, the human potential of recognition, the struggle for recognition, was connected then with language in a certain sense. And Honneth then, followed Habermas's linguistic turn, but worked really, all the books which he writes presuppose language and memory, but they stress then this struggle for recognition, or the obvious, the turnaround, namely not recognition, but to humiliate and so on. Now, in the Marxist revolutionary theory, it was also not simply about bread and, sharing of wealth and so on. It was also about recognition. It was not clearly expressed, maybe, so much, because the economic things were so much in the foreground. That means work and tool were so much in the foreground that the other side, that when you were in the work, why do our workers not to be called workers but want to be called middle class, right? That has something to do with recognition. It is part of the struggle for recognition. We are not working class. We are. And the confusion in the campaign, including Obama, is the middle class, the hard-working middle class, the working class, and then they drop it again because it's not good for propaganda to call people working class who do not want to be called working class. I mean, it's counterproductive. So then they fall back into middle class. Nowhere do they say low middle class, That is the plumber, Joe the plumber, that's the low middle class. They even set up the limit, $250,000 a year, and McCain set up $2 million a year or whatever. So that's the low middle class, So they didn't mention anything about the middle class or the upper middle class, the upper bourgeoisie, who is really the corporate ruling class of the country, who will have to decide what he will have to do. So he will get through, for instance, now concretely, he will get through the health insurance, national health insurance, because the corporate elite wants to have it. Ford Motor Company does not want to have $3,000 health insurance on every car or whatever. So they will push it all on the federal government, and Obama will have to do that. Also, the ruling class will not tell the American people what sacrifice they have to make. They leave that to the Democrats. The billionaires will not tell the American people how much they have to sweat from now on in order to pay for the debts. But they leave that to Obama, they leave that to the Democrats and to the liberals, the ultimate liberals, and so they have started already, sacrifice, and so on. So it's always the same story. So therefore, this is blended out. So I think Americans are not even aware that they have a ruling class. all the time. In spite of the fact that you have a whole library there that describes it. Yeah, there. Look, Klein over there, all these people, they describe it very precisely, what the ruling class is. So.
There's no ruling class in the Constitution?
No, there's no word democracy in the Constitution. It states that every state has the right of a republican form of government, not a democracy.
Right. Yeah.
So I'd like to know how that delusion started that we're a democracy.
Well, what I just said is it has something to do with recognition, people somehow feel lowered when they are called working class, I'm just a bus driver, or I'm just a garbage collector, or whatever, It's a personal struggle for recognition, and it's an expression. We do not want to be at the bottom of society.
But if Hannah brings in Mead in order to fix Hegel, in his opinion, with this struggle for recognition book I'm reading now, where Mead's got this idea, I am me because this is how I see myself through you, stuff, right? I see this as falling behind Hegel in Hannah's ignoring the phenomenology of the mind, and that's where I'm trying to understand what is Hannah's, theory of the struggle for recognition, and how is it critical? That's where I'm going through this book, and I'm coming up with no answers.
Well, I think when you have on my website there is this roadmap, and when you look at this roadmap, you can somehow see what they have done. Let me just see if I find it there. So Hegel is in the background. Even the Axel Honneth, starts with Hegel. Usually his books, they are expressively or not expressed. But when you see here this A there, here in front, so you see all these little fields, and
there's one, because I don't even know which, I could never even find that.
Do you
have this?
Well, this one? Okay.
I could never even find it.
It's on their website.
Well, it's on the website publications, A, B, C, and D. But I can show it to you here in the...
You can get online and print them out.
So I was looking for it, I couldn't find it. The question is, where the Frankfurt School sets in. So where Habermas and Axel Honneth and others are, is this here, under personal and the subjectivity, human subjectivity, up here, this one. And the human subjectivity, you see then the 5 human potentials: language, work, sex, struggle for recognition, and nationhood, and so on. So, but you see where it is not, it seems not to have anything to do with civil society, for instance. Civil society is the level on which Marx operates, So, but they go somehow to the presuppositions of civil society. That means they would like to transform it from below, in a certain sense. Philosophically. Or, in other words, the great systems seem to have collapsed. It happened in Greece, Aristotle, Plato collapsed, and suddenly you have Stoics, Epicureans, and so on. They are people now who go to the individual. See, if these superstructures collapse, then all what you are thrown back on the individual, and you try to rebuild the world from the individual, particularly when the mythology, the faith, and so on, collapse. Then the individual is thrown back to himself. You see that, for instance, Socrates, where Socrates, is a sophist, and since the people have no hold anymore in the public mythology, he gives them a new hold, and that is the daimonion. That's the conscience which he introduces. And for this he is sentenced to death because he introduced a god, and that was forbidden by Athenian law. But it is the conscience, that means the subject. Conscience is the combination of rational argumentation and empirical insight. So you bind a norm together with the situation, and that way you come up with a decision and so on. But the Epicureans, the Stoics, they all fall back, and the same thing happened after Hegel and after Schelling. The great systems collapse, and so people are thrown now to the subject. And that's what Jean-Paul Sartre does, and what the existentialists do, and so on. So it has something to do with the dilemma of the system in which we live, in which people do not find orientation any longer. So where can you find the orientation? So the Frankfurt School does the same thing now, and already Kierkegaard and Marx protested against Hegel's neglecting the individual in his system. Now he has the system, he has the individual human subjectivity there, But his emphasis is on this unbelievable movement in which the individual just becomes the little flower on which the great man steps, or becomes just this, this foul existence, as he calls it. That means people are bumbling around without any anomia in Durkheim's sense, and have no value whatsoever, and nobody knows that they have ever lived. So therefore they wanted to re-evaluate us to, give new recognition to the individual and the value of the individual. So that is the whole thing of the Western civilization, the breakdown of the Western civilization, Western culture.
Could I interject a couple of questions, comments here? First, if we jump back to the Frankfurt School interpretation of the rise of Hitler, and I know you only gave us a rough draft, but the National Socialist German Workers' Party, it only was the first winner in 33 among many parties. Still in 32, 33, Social Democratic Party and the Communist Party, they were second and third. So even at that point in 33, there was the potential power. So this idea of this is why it's kind of frustrating, this authoritarian personality view. There were tens of millions of workers who voted for the SPD and then the Communist Party in 32 and 33. That was shifting, but still they were number 2 and number 3.
And then the Nationalist Party, there were a lot of nationalist parties.
Right, there were other ones, whatever it was, the German National Party and the centrist, but they were second and third. So there could have been potentials for joining together between the two and smashing Hitler.
Right.
So to me that points to not a failure in workers, which seems to be a common theme among intellectuals, to see the workers as responsible, but it's a failure of the leadership, the organizational organizational aspects that they had, the parties, the leadership, Stalin at the head of the Comintern. So it's frustrating to me to hear these sort of anti-communist intellectuals say, it's something intrinsic inside of whatever the soul or the mind of the workers, rather than a concrete question of their organization is bad, their leadership is bad or corrupt, meaning Stalin, their socialist organization would not work with. So it almost seems to me just more of a concrete historical question rather than maybe a philosophical problem of Germans have an authoritarian personality.
Right.
So that's one.
Let's take one first, and then can you give the other one?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so what we have, in 1929 and 1930 is Fromm's project, and Fromm is only one of the psychoanalysts, and there are 2 or 3 others, and Horkheimer hires them. So we have the Frankfurt Institute, and then we open up first in the basement of the Frankfurt School. There in the institute, there is a Freudian Institute, and so what Fromm developed.
The basement.
Yeah,
that's funny.
There was Fromm developed a social psychology as a discipline in a certain sense, and there you see what I just said. They wanted to know where things were going, and so they started. Their starting point is not politics or whatever, but the personality, the psyche of the people. And so what they don't say, right away, the Germans have this authoritarian tradition or this authoritarian personality. But they wanted to find out where the workers and the Angestellte is its low middle class, that was the supervisors and so on, where they were standing psychologically, in which direction they would go, But there are the other things, what happens in society, the depression and so on, and the Prussian state organization. So that's outside. They want to see what disposition people have if there is, a fascist movement or a socialistic movement, where they will go, these millions of workers. And so then they set up, this type of criteria, and one is, it's the authoritarian personality is romantic, the authoritarian personality is pro-capitalistic, the authoritarian personality is
masochistic, sadist.
Well, the sadistic element, the masochistic element. So the romantic means they are inclined to look for the good life in the past, the Middle Ages or whatever, and this is different for every country. So in Italy it was the Roman Empire, in Spain it was the conquistadores, in Germany it was the tribal man, the Rhine and the Danube, and in America it was the cowboy with the red neck and the big hat, the Southwest, and running out on the horse all over the place. So that is what the past is. My aunt, she came 104 years old in Rochester, when we had no labor unions yet in 1900. That was the good time. We could go to the streets at 9 o'clock at night time. And since we have the labor unions, everything has become wrong. So the good things are not in the future, but the good things are in the past. So therefore, you have to go back to the past. So this romantic thing is very strong. And then the pro-capitalistic thing is not surplus value or whatever, but it is the leader. That Ford, who puts these guys at the assembly line for $1 an hour or whatever, and or a day, whatever he had, and that control. Otherwise, they would go to the Lake Michigan and would go swimming all the time, would be unproductive or fishing or whatever. So therefore, you have to put them in Detroit, at the assembly line, thousands of them, and that is Fordism, that's Taylorism, which, by the way, goes into the white-collar people now in the meantime too, They Taylorize them as well. So, so that, the leadership thing, that the masses are lazy and so on. They need that guy, who gives meaning to their life. If that guy is a Ford in economics or is a military guy or a political guy, the masses have no meaning. He is the one who gives meaning to them. So when Hitler sent 3 million people, into Russia, that was their meaning, that they were under his command. That was the greatest thing what could happen, because otherwise they would have sexed around, eat all the time and would have done nothing. It's the leader who gives form and shape and direction to the life of the people, so that they are even proud and are willing to die for him because they feel his superiority.
It's part of this wonderful project that he has.
So that is what capitalism is for them. And then nationalism, too, is another element, right or wrong my country. You have many authors in the States here who have used that word, but it can be used, in a benign way and in the wrong way, so it can be absolutized. If you don't absolutize and you say, right or wrong my country, but the other countries are okay too, that's all right. But if you mean it absolutistically, then you mean, when we go to Afghanistan, that's right. When the Russians do the same thing, that is bad, and so on the whole thing, the whole push thing there, that first strike, if we have the suspicion, we can invade or whatever, This is all right or wrong my country in an absolute, religiously, it's idolatry. You make something finite, your nation, into the absolute. And the right, this authoritarian personality has that. And then, of course, the sadism toward the weaker minorities, gypsies, homosexuals, and so on and so on. Sadistic, but also masochistic. That means, like Odysseus, the much suffering guy. Hitler was also a much suffering guy. What this guy went through, is unimaginable, in terms of the battles in the Taunus Mountains still, and so on and so on, everything in ruins, and he just goes through. So they are also willing to take a lot. They are willing to make others suffer, but they are also willing to suffer themselves, including fate. When Hitler talks to the secretaries and says fate has decided it that way, then he bows down under that, whatever that is, fate, and is willing to take his own death, and so on. So this, and then there is the racial components too. but which is stronger or weaker. It was weak in Mussolini, it was weak in Franco and Salazar, it was very strong in Hitler, because of certain circumstances. But so you could have an authoritarian personality which does not have that component, or you could have an anti-Semite or whatever, who at the same time is not necessarily an authoritarian personality. So these are the 5 or 6 characteristics of an authoritarian personality, and the revolutionary personality would be the opposite, namely not romantic, but rather future-oriented. So the alternative future 3 has never been there. It's something completely new, like we went the first time to the moon. So we can really, once we can have a classless society, in spite of the fact that it has never happened before. And future-oriented, not romantic. And then, by the way, when you have bourgeois intellectuals, then, shouting against Marx when they say he has something romantic and so on. But this is a misunderstanding then, it would be ideology. And then also capitalism, of course. The guy, this revolutionary character, wants to overthrow capitalism, wants to transform capitalism in a way, that capitalism would
need instead of production for profit.
Capitalism would be the appropriation of what is it called?
Surplus value.
It's something like. But there's a formula. What is it called?
Private appropriation.
Capitalism. What do we? It's the private appropriation. Capitalism, the private appropriation of collective labor, and socialism, the collective appropriation of collective labor. So that means those people who produce it should also appropriate it. Now, if that is done through the state or through self-management, like you had in Yugoslavia, and there are many different forms, how this could be done now. But the principle is that the one who produces, and these are the 180 million workers who produce everything, they should also appropriate their surplus value. That doesn't mean that they have more salary. They may put it into schools. They may put it into hospitals, And like also Saddam Hussein did it, He took all the oil money and had free schools and had free hospitals and so on. So that is this type of Islamic type of socialism. Okay, so and then of course, the aggressive forces in people. So what to do with sadism or nationalism? Of course, they're international, So this is the struggle between international type, also Trotsky, and Stalin. Socialism in one country or socialism internationally.
Permanent revolution.
Right. And so so this nationalism, of course, not to idolatry with the nation state, and that is also the anti-war component, to make the ruling classes in the nation state responsible for the 2 wars. And Horkheimer would still say, you cannot talk about fascism, you cannot talk about concentration camps, you cannot talk about war without talking about capitalism. So that is the fundamental thing. But here you see the connection between before, if you shift from work and tool away to language and memory, you may, lose the focus. You may lose that focus,
and
it is decisive
question.
In the crisis now. It is, and I have said this all the last 40 years, that if they shift to language and memory, they should not forget the work and tool thing, because that still remains the whole thing. And while it is true that all the human potentials are permeated by language, they cannot be reduced to language. That means to make economics in language is not yet to do economics really to produce a car. And it is possible to produce without language. It's possible to make love without language. It's possible to struggle for recognition without language. So it is true, that language is present in all of this, but these are nevertheless fundamentally different type of potentials, and they cannot be reduced to it. And it looks sometimes a little bit with Habermas as if he was reducing all the others to this language and memory thing, and that this concentration made him really the great man he is in a certain way. But with greatness comes a certain one-sidedness, which is, I think, dangerous, particularly in the present situation where everything, it's the economy is stupid, of Clinton. Okay, so now with this left, right, and center, let's say something about it. So I would say the linguistic turn of Walter there, is, but let's go to you now. Leave that behind. Okay. Do you have a second question?
It was connected, sort of the why the loss of faith in workers and Marx and why the preoccupation with this internal self when we have Marx in Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right. He says it doesn't matter what this worker or that worker or the other worker says or thinks he is. It matters what the proletariat is and what the social forces will make it do historically. And this is where Lukács starts History and Class Consciousness with that quote. And he situates the study of class consciousness and class struggle with that. What is the proletariat? What is the bourgeoisie? And it seems like they were starting from the opposite,
This is a famous book. Lukács is still very important. The book on class consciousness and so on. The danger, is with this, that the economy, is psychologized in a certain sense. We do that all the time. The Great Depression, they said, well, it's just your panic. If you hadn't panicked, everything would have been all right. Or it is the consumer who's not motivated or whatever. Then it becomes so subjective, that the objective process or the movement of capital is not seen anymore. It's the same thing like in a hospital, when you say, I feel I have cancer, and then they do research and you don't have any cancer. Or they tell you you have cancer and you say, I don't feel anything. And so there is a difference between the subjective and science. And there are sociologists now who think, we have no working class because all the workers think they are middle class. When you take the image of the medical doctor, this is absolutely stupid, You cannot make a sociology of class and base it only on what people think to which class they belong, But you have to find some objective criteria, like, for instance, the ownership of means of production. Like Joe the plumber, owns a few means of production and can employ 5 people, and take him under his control, and the upper bourgeoisie has 5 million people under its control, and so on, or 10 million or whatever. So the
middle class too.
Yeah. Well,
how does this turn towards language and memory? How does it deal with, you have that sentence, I looked it up before I showed up in the second preface of the Capital. This is the idea, Marx writes, is nothing but the material world reflected in the minds of man and translated into forms of thought. Right. If we start from the point of language, right, we're turning Hegel back on his feet. We're undermining what Marx wrote about, that it's the material world makes these things in our head, and that forms thought. And then we transform, right, the material. And so we have this constant antagonism, this dialectical relationship between what the material world gives us, and then we want to transform it. But if we start with language, this language term, right, disregarding the whole problem, there's no treatment of memory, right? How are they not just falling behind Marx's statement?
Yeah, right.
Well, where's language, Walter? Is it part of the material world or is it part of the idealistic world?
Okay, but you have to see what the difference is between the two guys now. Hegel was a theologian, right? He was a Lutheran. He was a seminarian. He finished up his seminary and then didn't go into the ministry. The same thing, with other idealists. So that means they started out with the idea, what that is. That is God himself. So the logic is God's thinking before he created nature and history, or man, and so on. So, and this is what is called the idea. And that is historical idealism. Out of historical idealism, that turns over into historical materialism. Then it does it almost automatically, because Hegel enters from his logic, he goes over and writes volumes on the philosophy of nature, and then on the philosophy of history, and so on. So that means the discussion of the idea goes already by itself, over into the real type of a world or whatever. So what Marx and the materialists do now, they start not with God, with the idea, but they start with man and his man subjectivity. And that means they start with language and with work and with sex and with struggle for and with nationhood that can all go under materialism, because the theological idea has been discovered to be a function of the human brain itself. That means when Hegel says being and nothing and becoming and so on, and these are the ideas of God and so on, where the hell did he get them from, There is a sentence where Hegel would say, following Meister Eckhart, the eye with which you see us is the eye with which we see you. And that I is the logos of the first chapter of St. John's Gospel, So that means they think they have an insight into the thinking of God, which is then realized in nature and in history in an imperfect way. There is some Platonism involved still, a combination of Plato and Kant and so on. So this first thing is cut, That means the logic is discovered to be not the reading of the mind of God, but the projection, Feuerbach, the projection of the human mind into the sky.
Yes.
So the absolute spirit is really the human spirit, absolutized.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, that of course presupposes the Kantian turn, the Copernican turn towards subjectivity. That the things outside are organized by us. They are the creation of the subject. That is subjective idealism. And the other one, Hegel's, is an objective idealism. So nevertheless, it's all idealism. So the question is now, what does the materialist do? The logic, the determinate negation, turns over by itself, and Marx could not have put Hegel on his feet if he had not already stood on his feet. So Hegel would say, search first, or the New Testament says, search first for the kingdom of God, and everything, clothing, housing, and so on will be given to you. Hegel turns that around already. Look first for clothing and feeding and food and so on, and the kingdom will be given to you automatically. And so on. So
Marx looked for that, not Hegel.
Huh?
You just flipped it.
No, Hegel himself already in his phenomenology would say, the New Testament says, search first for the kingdom, and the other thing will be given to you. And Hegel turned it around already. And Benjamin has that, and says, look first for food and clothing and so on, and then the kingdom will fall to you by itself. So that is a materialistic turn then. But
then you're saying it's already in Hegel.
It's already in Hegel, yeah, right. So that means, first of all the great thinkers of the West were idealists. Number two, all these idealists had already a materialistic component. And Marcuse wanted to have a reader in which that would have been shown, and that reader was never written. It would be good to write that someday. So, therefore, idealism and materialism are somehow dialectically connected.
Yes.
If you go too deep into one, it turns over into its opposite.
Yes.
And in that sense, now Habermas is a materialist. And Habermas is engaged in methodological atheism. That means methodological atheism means with our concepts we cannot say anything about that what Hegel is talking about. It may very well be there. There may be transcendence, but we cannot say anything about this transcendence. So it is the same thing like the Mosaic law, the second and the third commandment, not to make images and not to name the absolute. And so the Frankfurt School combines Moses and Kant. Kant forbids that the human mind can enter the sphere of the thing in itself or the things in themselves. It's just closed for us. It's only open for faith, but it is not open for knowledge, not for scientific knowledge. So, and Habermas has got, and Hegel tried to overcome that, but he didn't come through. So in that sense, no matter if people now start with language, with work, with sex, or whatever, it is all materialistic in that sense that the idea of God is lost. That means that God was killed. That is what Nietzsche draws the conclusion. God is dead. We have killed him. Mm-hmm. And we have killed him means civil society. And we have killed him means the positive sciences. Because with their analysis, they have analyzed God out of the field. And it is a slow type of a process, which you can see practically. The great enlighteners still let themselves be buried, in the churches in the 19th century, in the 20th century not any longer, the 21st century not any longer, and so on. So there is an intense process of secularization. And so that is, in terms of materialism. But Hegel was probably the greatest idealist who has ever lived, the only one who really knew what idealism is. And there it developed to the extreme, and then it turned over, and became, already in Hegel there is an unbelievable realism what is happening in history. It's a slaughter bench, it's a Golgotha, it's a butchery, and so on. And there he says the same thing like Schopenhauer. They were enemies, but they said the same thing about the horror and the terror of the historical process. And why Schopenhauer thought Hegel was such an awful type of an optimist, such a crook and so on, was that he added something to that. Namely, he makes an a priori presupposition that there is an idea which then, what he calls either reason with Anaxagoras or providence with the prophets, which has a goal and a plan, and therefore this slaughter bench suddenly makes sense. And that is the horrible thing, that Auschwitz is supposed to make sense. This is why they are not so Jewish anymore, as the rabbis are, But you have to think that the rabbis, who put God on trial in Auschwitz, as Wiesel says, and they put him on trial. Why? What was the charge against God? God broke the covenant. God gave the Noah covenant, the Moses covenant, the Abraham covenant, that he would preserve the Jewish people. And here, 5 million of them are killed, and nothing can be heard except the Esmond and the dogs and the gas chambers of Fritz Haber's gas chambers. That is why then some of the rabbis never prayed again, and why 90% of Israel consists of unbelievers who may still, on Saturday, not work, but otherwise, it's all gone. But 10% are still on the right there who believe something.
You're saying, maybe metaphorically, exchanging Yahweh for the Uzi.
Well,
we can't protect. Jehovah won't protect us. The Uzi will protect us.
Right, and so, it is a great disappointment that the God, who led them into this situation, left them in the ditch. And Auschwitz is only the name. They suffered immensely, through the century. This was just the climax of all their suffering. They just had enough of it, And so this, I want to talk a little bit about this book there, which from a Jew here in the States, struggles for his identity, and he brought Adorno and Schoenberg and all these people together. We can say a little bit about it, but so the Jews are, but when we say the Jews are in a bad shape, so are the Christians, so are the Muslims, because they're the same Abrahamic faith community. Okay, but we said a little bit, about that the Frankfurt School is materialistic, historical materialism. One can also call it dialectical materialism. Stalin used that more, but it is, of course, dialectical. And that means that it is not positivistic like the materialism of the French doctors, which also was a metaphysical one, that the whole universe is just matter or whatever. Marx would never say a thing like this, It is much more connected with work and tool. That means man's metabolism with nature, this back and forth. As man transforms nature through his tools, he transforms himself at the same time. So the whole phenomenology of Hegel is materialistically then interpreted, and what the phenomenology shows how man makes himself, how man creates himself in this dialectical process between him and nature. As he struggles with nature, he forces himself. And in his struggle with nature, he subordinates other people under himself. And he does not only put dead tools between himself and nature, he makes his own species members into tools, into slaves, into serfs, into wage laborers. That is the horrifying thing. And so, therefore, the scarcity problem and the class problem are hanging together. It is only when the scarcity is overcome for a majority of people that also class, upper class, ruling class could disappear. So, but
what happens to alienation with this linguistic turn? Because alienation is always seen as, between the worker and what he produces, that the object that he produces takes a life of its own because it is sold and resold, and he has no part in that. And so how does alienation, or is alienation transformed with this emphasis on language and as a tool to satisfy the struggle for recognition?
Already before the linguistic turn, there was something happened to that concept of alienation, because of which Adorno didn't want to use it anymore in his sociology books, because it became more and more psychologized in a certain sense. For Marx, it was an economic process. It is an objective process in which I put fenders on a car of General Motors day after day, night after night. So a lot of my energy becomes objectivated, becomes alienated from myself. By the way, this is not a bad concept, first of all, or not a bad process. An artist, like Picasso up there, this Guernica there, he, of course, objectivated his own images into an objective picture. And so there is something in artistic production where alienation goes on, So that the worker alienates himself is not entirely a bad thing. We do have to alienate ourselves in order to produce something, put something outside of ourselves, a house or a car or whatever.
We would die without some alienation.
Right. Oh, yeah, right. Right.
Entfremdung.
The issue is where this word becomes a bad one is no return, that's the return. That means it goes back to the fundamental concept of the idealist, namely the notion. The notion is the universal, the particular, and the singular. And it is a process. The universal particularizes itself and singularizes itself. The universal alienates itself from itself and then at the same time reconciles himself again with himself. So if you take the human ego as the universal, then I particularize myself in these sentences which I say or whatever work I do and so on. But the question is, if I can return to myself, or let it in the sexual sphere, let's take Narcissus. Narcissus is a guy who cannot alienate himself. Whatever he looks into the river, he sees his own damned face all the time. Mm-hmm. He cannot break out to otherness. He cannot reach the other. If you take Don Juan, Don Juan has no difficulty to reach the other. He has 300 girlfriends in Spain and 600 in Italy and 1,000 in Germany and so on and so on. He has no problems. But he has the problem not to alienate himself, but to cancel the alienation. He cannot cancel the alienation anymore. And therefore Mozart puts him into hell, because that's where he put himself, into hell. Not being able to come home means not to be free. So this concept of the notion, which was originally a theological one, Marx makes into secularizes and makes into philosophical one and applies it to the worker. The worker particularizes himself, one fourth coming after the other, but he doesn't come home to himself. He doesn't come home to himself in the sense that the surplus value, that means what is more than his wage, which he needs to eat a hamburger and to come back with new energy next morning, that is of course alienation. That means only a small part of his self-objectification comes back to him in the form of wage, and the sense of wage is only to gain energy again, which he can apply again next day in the service of his master to produce new surplus value, which accumulates on the other side. So that means there must be alienation, but the real problem is not the alienation. The real problem is the cancellation of alienation. The worker cannot cancel it. So in the end, the worker has given all his energy to General Motors. That means his whole lifetime went into General Motors. And the empty shell goes down to David Miami and sits in the sunshine. That is the situation, the pitiful situation, So therefore the question is, how to cancel this. And it is also a question of recognition, because you don't see yourself. See, because I can go to that picture and say, this is a Picasso. But I put on fenders, on Ford motor cars in Germany, in one of the factories, and so You can never say, this is a Siebert, you know. It's the same damn fender from car to car, and there's no Siebert anywhere, you know. So that means that's another way how you do not reflect back to yourself. You come not home to yourself. When Picasso says, that's me, well, by the way, there was an SS-man came to his painting shop there, and the SS-man said, who did this? And Picasso said, you did it. That was a wonderful thing, because of Guernica, which the German U-200 watt bombed this thing to pieces.
Everyone knows the story.
The pieces, yeah, right. You know this story there, right? That is how Hitler tried out his Luftwaffe, you know, Air Force in Spain. And Hitler made a joke about that too there, because he said Franco thought the Blessed Mother liberated him, you know. I liberated him with the German Air Force. That's what I did, you know. And but our point is, you know, that Picasso came back to himself, you know, while Narcissus, you know, never goes out, he never particularizes. Don Juan never singularizes and never comes back to himself. Why this doesn't happen? He never finds a woman who gives him the possibility or opens up for him in such a way that she makes it possible for him to come back. So he could blame the women for it, but unfortunately there were some women in Mozart and in the other stories which would love him and so on, but he could not come back to himself, but compulsively had to fly from one flower to the other and never made it home in a certain sense. So, and not to make it home is hell. But the issue is, you know, what is behind that, now philosophically or logically, is that concept of the notion, which was originally a theological one, a Trinitarian one. So it cannot be Jewish and it cannot be Islamic. It is Christian and it is Neoplatonic. And it is Hindu, you know, the Trimurti, and so on. So some of the world religion and metaphysics thought that the absolute was Trinitarian, a process. And so the Neoplatonists, Plotin, had this idea, you know, of a Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And what the Christian church fathers, the Greek church fathers did, they connected the Logos with this Jesus of Nazareth, which is the hardest thing in Christianity to take. You know, and the Jews don't take it, Muslims don't take it, and the rest of the world doesn't take it, that this singular man there is identified with the Logos is the hardest point in the whole Christian setup. So nevertheless, you see there is a Father, you know, particularized himself in the Son, eternally in himself, and then everything is created in the Logos, so the God goes outside of himself, but at the same time remains at home with himself, never loses himself in this world, nor does the world lose itself in him. So that is the dialectical concept of the Neoplatonists, which goes up to Köln today, and which is high Christology. And low Christology is Jesus the Rabbi teaches a Sermon on the Mount. Very simple Christianity. It's the connection between Christianity, between Jerusalem and Athens, which made Christianity into this unbelievable structure, which is, you know, as a philosophical structure superior to all the others. But we have problems here in this country because we move on the level of analytical understanding, and that means 1, 2, and 3. 1 cannot be 3, 3 cannot be 1 with this nonsense. So therefore, there are the honest Unitarians on the other side of the highway, and there are the all damned dishonest Trinitarians sitting down there who have all become Unitarians, but they don't say so. And on Trinity Sunday, they talk about celibacy, but talk about everything else except the Trinity, because they have no idea what the hell it is all about. So, but that was, and Christianity is early on, already in John, in the year 100, it is already Hellenized. And to take, you know, the Hellenization away from Christianity would mean to kill Christianity. And Benedict knows that very well. The speech in Regensburg, you know, where the Muslims were so upset, had something to do with that. It's you know, it goes deep into practical things. Namely, Hellenization means, you know, that the God is intellect, that the God is spirit, first of all, not will. And when man is his image, then that means that also man is logos, first of all. And logos means word, it means speech, it means discourse. So what the Pope wanted to say, if we de-Hellenize, that's a great problem. If we are Hellenized, like the Arabic Aristotelians were, and so on, then man is an image of God, and God is the Word. God is himself a discourse, a Trinitarian discourse. And so when man then discourses, he doesn't have to kill. You don't have to kill each other. And then there is the issue, the movement of nominalism, Gabriel Biel, who is the teacher of Luther, and so on. So in the Reformation, you have the first de-Hellenization, the bourgeois revolution, the second de-Hellenization, and the third de-Hellenization is now the multiculturalism. You can connect Christianity with the Chinese, and you can with the Hindus, and, it fits somehow all. That's not true. The connection with the Greeks is so intense that if you take it apart, it would not be Christianity any longer.
What was the first de-Hellenization, Luther?
Nominalism, nominalism. From nominalism it went into... So, nominalism means we have no presupposition here, so we have to be filled in. Plato, the idea, which makes idealism, was in the sky, in heaven, and the world was just a miserable shadow. So my tree there is only a miserable shadow of the idea in the realm of ideas, which Augustine put into the head of God. So then Augustine was a Platonist, so then the idea is up there in the mind of God, and all what is on earth, is rather dark and shadow-like. And so then Aristotle took that idea and put it into the things. So that is called universale ante rem, universale in re, and universale post rem. The idea is either before things in the mind of God, or is in the things as entellegia, as purposiveness in the tree, so that he goes so far with the branches and what it looks like and so on. The species being, or the genus being, is the idea in the things themselves. And then for us, nominalism means, like the system of Linné, we have the idea of the universe is in the head now. It's a subjective thing. It's in the head, and we project it outside, and therefore put some order, divide it up into species and genuses and hundreds of plants and so on and so on. But these concepts in our head are not in the things themselves. We do not know what is in the things themselves.
Right.
We just, like the dog goes around, for the dog the tree is this, for us the tree is that. It always depends on our organization, on the organization of the subject, of what the world is like. So that means we objectivate ourselves. Here you have the notion again. And what we call is the objective world is our own making. That's what Kant discovered. But the issue is that there is a third step. Hegel looks always for the third, for number 3, because number 3 is, this getting together. So, and he got it all from Eckhart. One night, von Baader in Berlin gave him Eckhart's sermons, and he read it through all night long. And next morning, Hegel said, "This is what we always wanted." But Eckhart says nothing about nature, just little stories. It says nothing about history and so on. What Eckhart is concerned is the ego, the soul, which we lost too, and the God, and bound together by this eye. The eye with which you see me and create me is the eye by which I see you. You can see in the mind of God, as Hegel says in logic, before he created nature and history. And that has all collapsed. Right? So if we say there are rests of idealism in Marxism and so on, then it is this idea of an objective necessity according to which history moves. And that has been, killed by the positivists. The positivists are much less, in our campus and so on, are much less theological than Marxists. That we must have to admit. There is this idea of an objective type of necessity for which there is no empirical thing. You could also say when you take Hegel's philosophy of history still, you have that reason and providence, then you have God's goal, you have man's freedom nature, the humanistic element, and this freedom nature has now to be realized. And it's realized in history through the great man like Napoleon and so on and so on. And it is in the course of history. First, the freedom of the one, freedom of the few, freedom of all, and that is the goal of history, the realm of freedom, which Marx takes over, that concept, But the positivists, only keep what is empirical. And what is empirical is the staging. What is empirical are the agents of change. But they have cancelled humanism, human nature, freedom nature is cancelled, and the theological presupposition is cancelled. So the theological and the humanistic presupposition are cancelled, and so you are not allowed in sociology to have any a priori or whatever. Because it must be all a posteriori. But all the world religions, Islam, they are all a priori. They all presuppose a fundamental principle, Allah, or Yahweh, or El Shaddai, or Elohim, or Abba, or what, or Ab. That is presupposed. Nobody discusses if he really exists, if he can really speak. He's just speaking, and speaks to listening people and so on. So, but that's all the presupposition. The only thing what you can say, it is afterwards, after you have this experience, then you see that this original principle is somewhat at work. Abraham or Moses or whatever, see there is a certain guidance, but what if the guidance is missing, I mean, for centuries and centuries that God doesn't talk. So there are 400 years of slavery in Egypt, and it doesn't say a word. Between Jacob and Moses, is nothing, I mean, this is a long time to trudge around and work and bleed and so on, and make pyramids, and nobody says anything. And so, I mean, in that sense, the rabbis who still pray would say, what's new, I haven't done before so many times, But it is a fierce struggle, and this book which I just got here, you see what the struggle is going on in the Jew, but he is fighting for the Christians as well when he struggles, and he fights for the Muslims as well. They just haven't noticed yet in what kind of a mess they find themselves yet.
So where if you can generalize, where are the Frankfurt schoolers in this? Are they as theological as the Marxists, or are they as dry, or what do we call it, as the positivists?
Right. To make it simple, they are not theists anymore, like the rabbis are. Mm-hmm. But they are also not atheists anymore, like Marx or Freud is. That means they have moved from theism into the negation of theism, into atheism, and have moved beyond both of them into a third position, which you could call post-theism, which also their friend Paul Tillich has to some extent, Mm-hmm. That means the God who remains after the God has gone under in doubt and despair. That is a good formulation by Tillich. And Tillich was a good friend of Horkheimer. He was the doctor father of Adorno, and so they loved him, and they drank a lot of wine together. And Tillich, not being a Jew, left with them Germany and shared their fate voluntarily. The culture minister invited Tillich and said, "You can get the best position here in Germany if you rescind your book on the socialistic decision." Which had come out, and Tillich laughed into their faces, and in the same few months later he left with Horkheimer to the States voluntarily. And what that means, like the composer there, Schoenberg, when he was old, he asked in Chicago, no, in Los Angeles, he asked for Guggenheim, to get some support and so on, because they were starving, I mean, and they couldn't go back to Germany anymore, where they would have a heavenly life, and here it's a pitiful life as a professor or, a retired professor and so on. So they all had the same problem. One reason why Horkheimer and Adorno may have gone back, is that the German professor has a wonderful life and belongs to a different class of people. So, but Schoenberg stayed here, and the Guggenheim said, well, you composed 12-tone music, and you are a great theoretician, so we don't need any other references, and then they turned it down, You had nothing to eat anymore.
So in a way, post-World War II Germany, or even pre-World War II, the entire real intellectual class was basically lifted out and put in other, or basically kicked out and put in other countries, and that's why you have all this fraud, just like.
Well, I mean, they said, they had to escape, otherwise they would have been gassed, Mm-hmm. The institute was taken over by the culture minister, and the house of Horkheimer was taken by the SA, and so they could have no
to
chance.
Los Angeles? There were several who...
Well, they went first to Columbia University, and then later on, because New York is so hot and miserable, out of health reasons, they went to California.
Okay.
And so they settled. There was a whole German colony of intellectuals there. And Schoenberg was one of them, Thomas Mann, and they were all there.
Yeah, he went there.
Yeah, they were all there. Brecht, they all knew each other and were very different, in their opposition and all this, but it was a whole German colony. And that was a grace period for the United States, There was a real push in terms of intellectual life and culture. And if you ask today, what is still left, pitifully little is left. Tillich was here once, because Connie Lowe was his student. And so he visited a year before I came. And so they walked here through the streets, and Tillich said, Connie, what will remain of me here? And Connie said, absolutely nothing. And Tillich wanted to know why. And Johnny said, you are a systematician, and Americans cannot think systematically, so therefore it's hopeless. But that was not the only reason. The real reason was the socialist decision, which he could not even tell people that he had ever written it. That was the book why he had to leave Germany.
What's the name of the
Socialist Decision. And so, wonderful book, and that was the best book he ever wrote. So when he came here, it was as right-wing as it is now. He could not introduce himself with that book, so he wrote another one, On the Boundary Line. That was between the religious and the secular. So, the religion and the secular antagonism, that was acceptable here. But the class antagonism, that was impossible.
So how do you spell it? Tillich?
Tillich.
Tillich?
Tillich. Paul Tillich. Paulus Tillich.
Paulus.
Yeah, he was also great in adultery. Oh my God, he was adultery. They competed with each other in adultery.
With who?
With all the others.
Oh, all the others?
Yeah. No wild lives they had. Okay, now, do you want to have a rest or what?
Yeah.
Well, okay,
I think Walter, you've already started that for us.